I see it in a number of school leaders that our passion for the basic job of education drives all of the leadership and management decisions we make. And I think that is so very important, because it does inform the sense of purpose around leadership of a school if you're rooted in what matters for the pupils in the school, and bring every decision back to whether it makes a difference for the education that they are receiving.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where I am thrilled to be joined by Philip Britton MBE, who is Head of Foundation at Bolton School. And in this conversation, Philip and I talk about strategic school leadership. So the importance of adopting a strategic approach which involves connecting all of your school's activities back to its vision, a really strong articulation of the positive difference that the school seeks to make for the world. And in Bolton School, also really responding to its history and connecting to the history of the foundation there. Philip and I talk about how this strategic approach has guided Bolton School through the pandemic, and also preparing it and guiding it through the various other changes that we're seeing in society at the moment. Philip and I also talk about what strategic leadership means for fundraising, and Philip shares some superb tips for heads and senior leaders who might be unfamiliar with fundraising at the moment. Philip was brought up on Teesside and then went on to Oxford University, where he gained a first in physics. He won the Charles Fox Prize while teacher training in Cambridge. He worked as a physics teacher, head of physics and then deputy head at Leeds Grammar School, before becoming headmaster of Bolton School's Boys Division in 2008. In 2010, Philip was awarded an MBE for services to physics, and he is a fellow of the Institute of Physics, where he's been much involved in being a champion for physics education. In September 2021, he was appointed Head of Foundation at Bolton School. So he oversees Bolton School's Boys Division, Girls Division and Primary Division. Both the Boys and Girls Divisions are among the largest single-sex schools in the country. And across all of these sections, the Foundation educates about 2,500 pupils from the ages of 4 to 18. In addition to all of this, Philip is also a passionate advocate for fundraising for bursaries, and he's chair of trustees for IDPE, the Professional Association of School Fundraisers here in the UK. Before we dive into the detail, I wanted to let you know about a free resource I've created to help you prepare your school for the coming economic impact of the invasion of Ukraine. It's a checklist of things you need to think about and take action on now, and it's designed to prompt strategic conversations around the issues that actually matter. You can download your free copy at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/checklist. Okay, now let's continue with this week's episode. So let's launch into my conversation with Philip Britton. So hello, Philip, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast.
Hello, it's a pleasure to join you today.
So first of all, I would love to hear about whether you've ever reflected on where your passion for education comes from. I know that you've entered the sector through a love of physics, is that right?
Absolutely. I was first and foremost a physics teacher, and I think in terms of why do I teach, that passion came from during university, actually, when a very far-sighted lecturer and probably absolutely at the cutting edge in those days had us students make presentations of some of the work to one another. And I found that one of the things I really enjoyed was explaining physics to others, and not only enjoyed it, but felt I would likely be quite good at that. And so I decided that the teaching was for me.
Fantastic. I love it when I'm talking to people on this podcast, and yes, we're talking about sort of leadership and strategy and management and all that kind of stuff. But at the basic core of the reason we're here is that passion for education and the impact it can have on young people and set them on a trajectory of life, of curiosity, of kind of self-confidence, a sense that people can really have a successful life if they had a really good foundation in their education.
I think that's terrifically important. And I see it in a number of school leaders that our passion for the basic job of education drives all of the leadership and management decisions we make. And I think that is so very important, because it does inform the sense of purpose around leadership of a school if you're rooted in what matters for the pupils in the school, and bring every decision back to whether it makes a difference for the education that they are receiving. Because one of the things that drives me very much in what we do is that the pupils only get one go at passing through a school. We can have all of our plans and thoughts and developments, but they only get one go. And so very often, the idea that you should put in hand whatever it is you want to do as quickly as possible is important to those young people.
Absolutely. I think it's that balance, isn't it, between being innovative and creative, but not risking the education of any one person by being too far in that direction. We have a good standard best practice about what works, the way that the education is best delivered. And so I think that there's this sense of constant continual evolution of that, without risking at any point going, off the rails slightly with a particular project that then impacts on one child who only has that class and that year one time.
Yes, I think the way I look at that is that educational developments are evolutionary, but that you need to begin and just try something. And the idea of a pilot which then can be scaled or developed is really, really important. Arguably, I think one of the greatest faults of national level education policy is that there isn't a really good mechanism for piloting and experimenting. Too often there is the need to implement something before it has been properly trialed. And I think the rise in school-based research and teachers engaging in research in their classrooms is another really good sign of how the profession might develop.
Absolutely. And I think that scaling up can then happen at different levels, can't it? So you can have a pilot within a school, within a particular classroom or particular kind of extracurricular activity that then can scale up for that school. And then it's sharing across the sector, perhaps the independent school sector first and then the state school sector, what you've learned from that, so that everybody can benefit from the pilot that might start in one classroom in one school.
I think that's right. And those interconnections between different schools and different sectors within education are also tremendously important. And I think it's always well worth nurturing those as the educational landscape changes for us all, because one of the features over many years is that how schools are linked together, whether that was local authorities or multi-academy trusts or through the independent school associations, constantly evolve. That landscape is always shifting, and yet the connections that are necessary between schools are really an enduring and important feature of how education works. And one of the things we're really pleased with in Bolton is the Bolton Learning Partnership, where we are a full partner with the local secondary schools, and the focus of that is entirely on raising aspirations for the young people of Bolton, which is clearly an aim that all schools of all shapes and sizes can commit to and be part of.
Absolutely. And one of the things I know that Bolton School, as well as many schools, have been doing for quite some time is fundraising and activities around the bursaries side. And it's really welcoming to see that the attention is now expanding beyond just bursaries and into those partnerships between the independent school, state school sector, and the importance of those being really equal partnerships. I find that really a fantastic development to be seeing that we're now seeing equal kind of discussion of both partnerships and bursaries. Is that a conscious area that you're focusing on both? Because I know that you're doing bursaries as well, aren't you?
It is. I think if you just draw that whole issue back to its core and the moral purpose of independent schools, many have their origins in providing the best possible education to their local area, where education is seen as the route to the next steps for social mobility and for making the fullest contribution to society that someone can. And I think that for me, there are three strands to that in a modern independent school. One is a strong bursary campaign, and we can return to that later, which allows access to education for a few who can then make a difference to so many more. I think a central part is that independent schools keep a strong focus on their fee levels in general to make them as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. But taken together, those two strands will never allow an independent school to engage fully with its local area, because there will always be a limit on the size of the school as well as the nature of people in it. And that is where I think the partnership strand becomes so very important, because the leverage and impact that can be achieved through partnership work is likely to be engaging to so many more young people beyond the school itself in a local area. So for me, those three strands all go together in achieving the fundamental aim of making the school a part of its local community and making as much difference as you can. So partnerships, bursaries and accessibility for me are all part of the same mission.
Absolutely. And what I love is that we've already touched on a couple of areas today where we're talking about it through our passion for education, our belief in the impact on individuals, as we spoke about at the beginning of our conversation. I'm talking about it now in terms of the history of the foundation of Bolton School. And in fact, if not all, but many independent schools have that history rooted in a positive impact on local young people and the education that they receive. And I think that even though those things we're doing instinctively, basically that's the core of a good strategy, the core of understanding what your vision is. So your vision is a belief in education. Your vision is a kind of a focus on the people, the individual pupils within your communities, and that your vision is based around your history and your purpose that continues for centuries in different ways, but the core purpose is around helping in your local communities, specifically around education. And that all of those then draw together to create, as you've just beautifully elucidated there, that three strands of strategy around partnerships, bursaries, and ensuring fees stay as low as possible to ensure the kind of accessibility and the affordability there. And I think that sometimes in education, we shy away from using words like strategy because it sounds a little business-like, but basically that's what we're doing, isn't it?
Without a doubt, and I think school leaders obviously need to have a strategic approach. And I think borrowing language from business is something that we should not be squeamish about. So long as we have what we mentioned earlier, which is that core of being focused on the young people in a school, which is what it's all about. Because a school leader who is only running a business will not be a good school leader, but a school leader who is focused on young people and drawing on the expertise of how to run an organization and being conscious that, particularly in the case of an independent school, but also in the case of a state school, we are running a sizable business. Is really important, and to draw on the expertise and language and experiences of other industries. Why wouldn't we? We would encourage the young people to read as widely as possible and to gain all of the experiences they can. So why would a school leader look away from possible ideas they could draw from other sectors? And proper strategic planning, understanding why we want to do what we want to do. It's the why question is very, very important to me, because from that comes all of the motivation and sense of purpose that you can drive in a school.
I completely agree. And I think the other step from that is that actually when mission-based organisations that are not about profit, such as independent schools, are then utilising the frameworks that are developed within a for-profit business environment. What's really interesting is that it can then loop back to the for-profit business in kind of sector. And I think what we're seeing within that sector is a feeling that this is about serving people. So whether that's serving your customers, your clients in the best way possible, adding value, whether that's through sustainability, environmental or otherwise, whether it's through diversity and inclusion policies, the way that you socially impact your society, your community, should matter and is increasingly mattering to for-profit business as well. So I think this is a really important conversation where ideas can flow from one sector to the other to benefit all, which is really important. One of the things that's really important about when we're being strategic is that we have our eyes externally beyond our school gates, as well as understanding what's happening inside our school as well, obviously. And we've seen some huge, big trends over the last couple of years. So obviously the pandemic speeding up a lot of things that we'd seen previously to do with digital engagement, to do with social the lack of social mobility or compounding social mobility issues within society, to do with the way that individuals are thinking about sustainability. A lot of these things are being accelerated again because of the crisis in Ukraine and the economic impacts of that as well. What do you do as a foundation to make sure that you are looking externally as well as thinking internally about your school's day-to-day activities?
Yeah, I think one of the great advantages of working in a school is that the young people very often keep us alive and focused on what matters and what the issues are, because whilst they may not articulate them in quite the same way as adults, they do have a keen sense for what seems to matter to their future, and therefore what probably matters to all our futures. So if you take the sustainability strand of that, I think we've seen young people driving, thinking about the need to be aware of the environment, the need to be more aware of the ecosystems of which we are part. And drawing that activity into an orderly way in school has been really important to us here, and I'm sure to many other schools. We did not have pupils heading off to the climate demonstrations, but we did feel very strongly that was because we were helping them to understand how to be an activist within school and from school, and how to frame their thoughts and make most impact from the feelings that they had to actions that they might take. With e-learning, we happened at the beginning of the pandemic to be in a really good position. We'd introduced a one-to-one iPad deployment nearly a decade before, so it was very mature and baked into how we operate as a school. So we were able to move straight on to just running all of the lessons that would normally happen, but doing so online. But one of the really interesting things educationally that came out of that, I think, was that everyone realized what teachers already did know, which is that education is about far, far more than just transferring knowledge about a subject to someone who knows less than you do. And one of the great advantages, I think, if there are advantages to be found in the pandemic, what was that the wider public finally realized that schools were so much more important than just transferring information. They were places where young people grew up in an environment with friends, with guidance, with experts in that pastoral care. And so many parents worked out that was something they needed. Mm-hmm. And if we can capture something of that for the future, that rather than the continual narrative of schools being about what exactly is on the syllabus, we will have done ourselves an enormous favour. I think another example you didn't mention was the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement of recent years, where young people are brought into school. Often recent leavers have brought into school. So some very important and serious issues that need to be addressed. So arguably schools are one of the easiest places to keep in touch with what's happening, because the young people help drive the agenda from their own assessment of the world in which they find themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And I think as well that that gives us a signal of staff recruitment. Certainly the younger staff are starting to feel the same way, or are feeling the same way, some of our young people in schools, with regards to wanting to work for an employer that has a good sustainable footprint, that is doing something around social justice. And so if there's a parallel perhaps between what your pupils are feeling and those younger members of staff who are coming into the teaching profession, being able to attract those and retain those staff is really important as well. I wonder if you've ever felt that there was a slight disconnect between those passions that the young people have and what the parents care about and kind of what they're paying for. Do you feel, you mentioned in the pandemic that there was a bit of a bridge, that parents realised that it's more than just what's on the syllabus, but have you found challenges when it comes to communicating to parents the way the school is moving forward on issues around social justice, around climate change and so on?
I think if parents are engaged right from the beginning, when first they're considering the school, and then when their youngster is part of the school, in the sense of purpose, that there are relatively few difficulties with that sort of mismatch. So for example, at Bolton School, we talk a lot about those different strands of education, the academic and the intellectual curiosity, of course, but the pastoral support and care, the building lifelong hobbies and interests, and doing all of that in the context of being part of a community. And I do think that parents see that holistic approach as something that they want. Obviously, for different parents, one of those strands will be weighted differently. They will care more about some of those things than others. But I do think they appreciate that the whole piece is important. And one of the ways that I encourage people to think about that, even in open morning presentations, is to reflect on what alumni of the school will actually value when they're in their mid-20s. And of course, they will value great exam results, and they would expect great exam results. But those exam results are only the passport to the next step. They're the passport to the university place. And they're the beginnings of a CV, but that's all they are. They're the passage into the next stage, the skill set that helps people thrive in the next stage of their life is all of the soft skills and personal sense of well-being that arises from the activity program in a school, or the pastoral and nurturing care that a school provides. Those are what will drive happy and successful lives. As well as, of course, that necessary gatekeeping exercise of first-rate exam results. So I don't think that necessarily needs to be a disjuncture between what young people in a school will care about and what parents might think they are buying, because at a core level, they might, of course, they will want all of those things in different measures, but they will feel that the holistic approach is what they want. So often it's important just to step back, and this is again a message I give to parents who are considering the school, and it's where do you want, how do you want your young boy or girl to become a young woman or man. And those, particularly that 7-year journey of the senior school in any school, is absolutely about that transition. And there is so much more to that than just some exam results.
Yeah, a lot of it's about self-discovery as well. Those soft skills, which absolutely, we want all of the pupils that leave our schools to have those soft skills, but it's also understanding how you can deploy those yourself, what your own purpose in life is, your beliefs, your passions, the things that you are really good at, that you want to really focus on, the things that maybe you want to work at a little bit more. It's all so individual, isn't it? And I think we're seeing that as a trend across the sector as well, the sense that really good schools have to cater to individual pupils.
And do so by providing variety. I think the key messages are to have as much different strands of activity as possible, and to encourage young people, particularly at the start of their school careers, to try out as many different things as they possibly can. because they don't yet know what their passion will be, and they don't yet know what they might be good at. And you don't know what you're good at until you try something and see that you might enjoy it, and then see that you might invest the time and expertise and become good at that activity. And I think that's why the lifelong interest strand of a sense of purpose about a school is really important, because there are very, very few opportunities in life beyond school and university where you can take up a brand new activity, throw yourself into it, decide whether you'll like it or not, and then either do so or move on to something new. And that really is something we should provide in our schools.
Absolutely. And I think as well, it's that understanding that even the things that you're not particularly good at, if you enjoy them, that's fine. Keep going. And you may never be amazing at it, but I think all of us need to understand that we can really enjoy. I mean, I'm absolutely awful at art, but I love it. Like, well, I'm using color on a palette. It's like I'm free, but it really doesn't matter that I'm absolutely horrendous at it. And I think that that's what we need to get over to our young people, isn't it? Is the idea that being good at something isn't actually what's required. It's the passion, the enjoyment. And along the way, you will find things that you're also really good at.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true, and the way schools can do that is to provide variety and encouragement, and that is a lot about what a good teacher is about.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned a few moments ago that I'd love to return to is this idea of involving parents. You talked about the fact that you're talking to parents all the way through their journey of choosing you as a school, and then afterwards as well to bring them into this community and understand what it is that the young people are passionate about. I think this is a really good hallmark of leadership within schools, which can sometimes feel like a bit of a tension. And I wondered whether the way that you involve parents in maybe strategy development or particular kind of responses that you've had to the pandemic or to the Ukraine crisis, whether you've learned lessons in the last few years, particularly because of the changes we've been seeing and we've been living through, with regards to how to balance that sense that you are leading and therefore taking decisive decisions, especially very quickly at times, but also you are involving your staff and your parents in the community in their decisions. Have you found a balance for that?
Certainly a work in progress, and clearly at some level leaders do need to lead and decide as you suggest, but I think also they need to hear as many different strands and perspectives on the issue being just discussed as possible. One of the things with communication with parents and indeed other interest groups is to some extent online. It has never been easier to have a survey, to take a brief snapshot of opinion, to create a webinar or a focus group, but without the on costs in terms of time for parents in coming to a session at school. So the ability to engage is probably stronger than it has ever been. The area to be sure is reproduced in school that used to exist pre-pandemic and has taken a back seat is the opportunities for casual and informal encounter, which so often happen around concerts and events and on the touchline at sports fixtures and elsewhere, where those friend-making conversations with parents are really an important part of the glue of a school, which perhaps allow more difficult discussions on other occasions. So I think certainly the online engagement that the pandemic has brought leads to many opportunities. But one of the things we want to focus on building back is those informal chance conversations that are equally valuable in understanding what a school community wants and what the next steps for it would be.
Absolutely. And I think often it's the informal conversations give you the first little hint that there's a trend emerging with multiple people mentioning certain things that they're thinking about, that they're concerned about. And then that can lead naturally on to, I see the leadership discussion, which then says, right, let's set up a couple of, informal little kind of web-based conversations or focus groups, if you like, but very informal, very relaxed, where we frame a couple of questions that we want to get some more feedback on. And I think you're right that during the pandemic, we learned the benefits of the online techniques, the Zoom, the Teams, etc., to enable some more deep engagement for a very short period of time through conversations that can happen in that environment. And hopefully, as we come out of the pandemic or through the worst of the pandemic, we're now seeing that we can harness both. We can see some of those spontaneous conversations that are happening. They can spark the topics that could be delved into in a slightly deeper way through a more structured process of conversation.
No, I think so, and I think it's one of those paradoxes that probably through the pandemic there have been better attendances at parent information events than ever. In fact, that's probably a general truth through many meetings that I've been part of, and that's because the on cost in time and travel and organisation to get to a meeting is so much less. Obviously, also that the nature of discussion and the depth of engagement can also be rather less. So I think it will definitely be about identifying the possibilities of retaining some of the lessons learned during the pandemic, but also remembering that we did a lot of good things before that in terms of connections with those people we were working with in a school.
Absolutely. And I saw that with the kind of governor away days that I was running, that yes, we managed to transition them online during the pandemic, and it was better than not doing it at all. But that type of depth of discussion is really quite challenging to replicate that for an online setting. And so in person is infinitely better. And yet there are other settings where people are saying, oh, this online is brilliant, for a short snapshot of viewpoints. It's brilliant. It's fantastic kind of communications tool. So like you say, I think all leaders across all different industries are now trying to find the ways that we can hold on to the benefits of some of these new communications techniques, whilst also remembering to replace and replicate some of those in-person opportunities before the pandemic as well.
Without doubt. And I think for many of us, it's remembering that a meeting had several parts to it. There was certainly the formal business of a meeting, but also there was the discussion when collecting a cup of coffee, and the discussion whilst waiting to head off from the meeting. And those were all a valuable part of social glue. I think parents' evenings are a good example where many schools have taken those online, and we have, and that is something that has been welcomed by pupils, parents and colleagues because of the logistical arrangements being so much easier. And again, both parents being able to attend where perhaps one would have had to stay at home to look after a younger sibling. But it only works because the nature of that encounter is a snapshot of performance at a particular time. It would never work if there was something deep and difficult to discuss about a pupil. But of course, that meeting would be a different meeting. The parents' evening meeting is just a stock take. It's a general sense of how things are going, and that can readily be achieved online. In a way, triaging so that much more in-depth personal meetings can occur when they need to.
Absolutely. And even in the old-fashioned in-person kind of parents' evening, there was never much time for the pleasantries because it was always on such a strict timetable. So those interactions would always happen. Kind of the get to know the teacher in a slightly more relaxed setting would be at the concerts and the sports events and so on. So it's always separated those two purposes. So I think that's why the online parents' evenings do work really well. One thing I'd love to dive back to before we finish our conversation, I'd love to speak to you in a bit more detail about your bursaries program and your fundraising that you're doing around that, which you mentioned earlier on. And one of the things that I'd love to hear about is your thoughts on the role of a head, so a head of school or foundation, and the role that individual can play within the fundraising opportunity or the fundraising conversation. And I know that as chair of trustees of IDPE and as kind of very close working alongside Laura Firth, or director of development, you must have some good experience in this area. Do you have tips for heads who are perhaps less experienced in fundraising?
Very, very much so, and I think the starting points you've touched on a few that would be really useful. I think to understand your development office and to make the right appointments to help with the fundraising in a school is absolutely crucial, and to understand that development professionals have an organisation in IDPE that can both support them through networks and support them through a sense of professional development is key. And that won't be obvious to every head. Why would they know that such organisations exist and that they're not alone, and their development department need not be alone? Because one of the key aspects to development work is that it is highly non-competitive. The funds that can be raised for one organisation are most unlikely to be available to another organisation because of the personal connection, the motivation that a donor will have. So I think it's a great area for sharing. And then I think that the next most important thing for heads perhaps newer to development work is to not feel awkward, to not feel squeamish just because you're talking about money, because you're not just talking about money. What you're talking about is the connection and empathy that alumni have with a school, which is in their minds so important to how their lives have turned out. Because otherwise you wouldn't be speaking with people anyway. They've already made a few steps on the journey before a head is at all engaged, and those steps will involve a real connection with the school and a real sense that somehow, in some way, that school made a difference to their lives, and perhaps the beginnings of a thought that somehow they could help another generation to have the school make a difference to their lives. And so what the head is doing is describing the current school to the alumni, making sure that match still happens, making sure that sense of purpose of the school is as it would be remembered. Very often that is enduring ethos coupled with doing things in a modern and different fashion. Of course, schools are not stagnant. They're not like they were 40 years ago, but the purpose of the school probably is, and that's something that the current head can articulate and make connections with an alumni. And then when it comes to the discussion of a donation, being flexible about who is best placed to do that detail. Very often it will be a development director, but it can just as easily at the right moment be a head. And then I think the key message there for the beginner in that area is to remember that conversation will not be a surprise to the alumni you're meeting. Yes. They would not be at the meeting they are at by the time you got to the stage where you might be making an ask without having probably decided what they're going to agree anyway. They're just awaiting the opportunity in a nice and pleasant fashion. So it really isn't going around holding a hat out and asking for donations. It's a very much more sophisticated and connected and human activity than that. And so I would argue that those are the things that heads are expert at, engaging people, talking about themselves and talking about their schools. So who would be better placed to deal with development work?
Completely agree with absolutely 100% of what you've just said. I'm here nodding away as you're talking. And I think that it does come back to having that professional fundraiser in place, doesn't it? Because as a head, most heads don't have experience of professional fundraising. A few might, very, very rarely. But if you and your governors don't have that experience on your team, then absolutely finding the right person who has the right skill set and preferably some experience in the sector as well, to be supported by IDPE. And I will put a link to IDPE in the episode notes for this episode so that people can connect through to that if they're not familiar with the organisation. It is absolutely fantastic in supporting professional fundraisers within schools. And it can be a slightly isolated position within a school if you're the only one who really knows the nuts and bolts of how this can work. And so to have the support of IDPE and the support of the head and the governors to be guided in this process. And I love as well that there should be no nerves about, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to make the ask as the head. Because firstly, you don't have to make the ask as the head. It can very easily be the director of development, especially in the early days if you're nervous. But secondly, and more importantly, quite often you never actually get to the big scary ask because the conversation has just got there naturally as you go along. So you'll have a plan, but actually when the moment arises and you just say, will you join us in making a contribution to this project? And if you have the confidence to name a figure in that sentence as well, all the better. That's it. It's not a big scary thing. It's a conversation between two individuals who both care about the impact that you're trying to achieve with that donation.
I think that's exactly so. And one of the good things that the IDPE has been doing recently is its course on fundraising for school leaders, where I think both those general messages and a degree of coaching has helped a number of school leaders. And to your first point, I think the professional aspect of the task of development is really important for governors, particularly to have in their minds, as well as heads. They would not have the estates department in school run by someone who was amateur and didn't know how school estates ran. They would not have the finance department run by someone who wasn't skilled in accountancy. And probably still too often, some schools imagine that the development function can be led by someone well-meaning rather than immersed in the profession of development work. And I think that's probably one of the greatest transformations I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, and long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the advent of the fundraising regulator, the GDPR restrictions, there's a lot more compliance that's now required in this area, as well as really best practice relationship management with prospects. And I think as well, the fact that we now have a chartered institute of fundraising, actually became a chartered institute within the last couple of years, is an indication of the way this profession is moving. So, sorry, Philip.
No, I was going to say absolutely so. Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Philip. It has been really wonderful to hear about what you've been doing within the Bolton Foundation, and the way that your passion for education shines through, and that roots back into kind of going into the physics teaching job that you first had out of university, and understanding that is still there as your passion, and understanding that it connects through to how you can develop strategically an approach to achieving your school's core purpose. And through those 3 areas you talked about, the partnerships, the bursaries, as well as the lower kind of fees, low fees possible to include accessibility there. And then I think at the end there, a really important conversation around fundraising. It's so important that we understand the power of fundraising within schools, but also the responsibilities that we have as leaders to ensure that that's done really professionally. So thank you so much for your time today here, Philip.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.